general nature thereof. Seeing none, looking for approval of minutes from the June 18th meeting, moved by Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That's carried. Presentations, and that moves us into a series of delegations, beginning with Mr. Black.
Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, councillors, thank you for your service to the citizens of Waterloo. You may have noticed you've had a fair number of challenging, difficult decisions to have made over the past term. And the key to making good, difficult decisions is having a variety of inputs. And you have had that variety. You've listened carefully to delegations from the citizenry, from developers, and from each other. And the difficulty in the decisions making is because we won't know whether their consequences are good for another 20 or 40 years. Then we'll know whether they were good decisions or not. So the diversity can't think of two people, Councillor Freeman and Councillor Durrell, who are more polar opposites in their attitudes, backgrounds, the viewpoint that they bring to the horseshoe are quite different, except they're similar in their passion and affection for the city. Naming other names, Councillor Maven. Councillor Maven has played the devil's advocate very well over the past term. And naming other names, Councillor Whaley, thank you for being present. Now I can quote you. To the development industry, not good enough, please try again. Well done. Well done. To Councillor Henry, Chair Henry today, and Councillor Veith, you've brought to this horseshoe experience and knowledge from prior terms, and you'll carry that over to the next term of council. Well done. Mayor Jaworski, you have the next term coming up. I can't think of a better, more ideal situation. You have 4 councillors who are staying on, bringing that knowledge and experience to the horseshoe. And you have 4 new faces, new enthusiasms, fresh ideas, and I believe the city will be better for it.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I think we don't hear that very often. And I want to express on behalf of councillors to not name names, but to name all of us without naming names. We very much appreciate those folks that take the time to pay attention to what's going on, to engage on these issues, to be present, and to reflect back what you're hearing, what you're understanding, and where you're coming from, and sharing and sharing those observations with all of us, and a more lively and dynamic gallery than we normally see on an afternoon at FSP. You are friends today, and I think we all appreciate that we've been able to rely on at least one member of the public always watching over what we're doing and seeing what's going on here. So thank you very much for that. Any other members of council? Thank you, and I'll let you go back to your seat, Citizen Glenn. So moving on to other matters, I think I should reflect. Council will have some time in 2 weeks to add, I think, its own reflections on the term that was, or the terms that were, as the case may be. So next up, we have appeal to waive minor variance fees for shed at 328 Craigleith Drive in Waterloo. Ali, please come forward. You have minutes. Go ahead when you're ready.
Appeal to waive request that I have. This is my property right at the corner over there. In 2016, I had quite a bit of renovations outside of my house, which included a deck at the backyard, included the whole renovation of the driveway and going to the backyard, the flank yard slopes, and also I put a shed right in the flank yard. I hired 3 contractors, and I asked each one of them which permits I need for these construction that I have. So the only one who informed me that I needed a permit was the one who put the deck for me, and that is the copy of the permit that I got at that time. And the other 2, the one who put the driveway and rehab the slopes, and the one who did the shed for me, they told me that I don't need any permit for that. I'm not presenting this as an excuse. I understand that lack of knowledge is not an excuse, but I just want to, I'm presenting this as a to show my goodwill that at that time I was doing my homework for this. However, we went ahead and put this shed in, and after a year I got a notice from the city that this shed encroaches into the limits of the house. It's half a meter encroaching. So I wanted to apply for a minor variance permit, but at that time I realized that the cost for that permit is about $1,000. Just to apply for that minor variation is $1,250. At that time it was $1,200. Then the total price of the shed is $1,480 plus tax. Considering the application fee and the price of that shed, my request is to waive this application fee so I can fill out my application and go to the council and discuss the options that I have to keep the shed at that location. Thank you very much.
Very succinct. I appreciate that. Are there any questions of council for the delegation? There may be some of staff, but are there any questions for the delegation? No, you've been very clear, I think, on what's happening. Councillor Durrell, did you have?
I just want to make sure. I know you're a corner lot then. So this is facing the back of the shed I'm looking at right now, because you can tell where I'm pointing. So, okay, sorry, on the big one there.
Yes, that is the back of the shed.
Do you mind going to the picture that you had 2 or 3 ahead? Oh, no, you have to do it on the big screen. Go back a couple. And you had a beautiful picture of your neighborhood with a gigantic arrow pointing. Okay, yeah. So the shed then is, you can use the little mouse.
Okay, so the shed is right.
Got it.
I have 2 trees here, and the shed is here, and the from the front, it's exactly is at this location.
Yeah.
At the back, it's this location.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's on the flankage fronting Cumbermere. Yeah. Other questions for the delegation? No, I think you've been very clear, so we may have some more questions. But are there any questions of staff on this piece? I think Councillor Maven.
Through you, Chair Henry, if the shed had been built someplace else, would there be a minor variance request or permit required? Is it the location of the shed that's the issue, or part of the issue?
Cam, I see Mr. Cotter behind you, ready to respond.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. The zoning bylaw allows accessory structures within the rear yard and the side yard. The shed, as shown on the photographs, is located within the flankage yard. So the zoning bylaw prohibits sheds located within the front yard and the flankage yard, which is what the cause of the issue is. If the shed was relocated to the rear yard, it would be in compliance with the bylaw, provided it was 2 feet from the rear lot line and the side lot line.
Okay, so it could have been built originally in compliance without going through any variance. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Any other questions? Let's have Councillor Darrell.
I'd just like to follow up through you, Chair Henry, on Councillor Maven's request. So if it had been built 2 feet back, there would have been would have been a $500 permit or no permit at all?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Durrell, if the shed was relocated and constructed in the rear yard, it could be located from the rear lot line or the side lot line within 2 feet. But because it's within the flankage yard, any shed within that flankage yard, which is the distance between the house and the street, sheds are not permitted within that zone of the property. So it wouldn't matter if it was adjusted slightly in terms of its current location. It would have had to been relocated into the rear yard to be in compliance with the bylaw. And there wouldn't, as long as it was less than 108 square feet, it wouldn't have required a building permit or a fee from the city.
Sure, I'll let you add something.
You're right. Your current bylaw doesn't allow me to put that shed in. But at the time that I built this, I think the bylaw, the 2012 bylaw, was in place. And when I checked that, it allowed me to put a shed 6 meters in the flankage yard, considering that it is 6 meters minimum from the street line. That was my understanding, and that was what I confirmed with my contractor at that time. But the current bylaw doesn't allow this. So I believe the previous bylaw should be applicable in this case, because I built it back in 2016.
I think we may seek further clarification, but I don't want to encourage a back and forth on this, but I appreciate you adding that perspective. Let me ask you one question, and then I'll ask you to sit down, and we'll see if there's an appetite around council table to agree or not to your request, and then that will be the response. Had your contractor who built your shed notified you that that was not an appropriate location to build it based on the zoning bylaw, would you have constructed it somewhere else, done nothing? What would you have done in that case?
Probably I wouldn't build that because I don't have enough room in my backyard.
Okay, I think that's helpful to know. If there's no other questions for the delegate, I'll say thank you very much. And ask you to sit down, and it's now in the hands of council. Are there any further questions of clarification, council, of staff based on the delegate? You've heard from Mr. Cotter already. I'll look to Mayor Jaworski.
Through the chair, just on the delegate's last comment regarding 2016 zoning in that area, if it was in fact different, that the flankage yard wasn't covered.
Mr. Cotter?
Through you, Chair Henry, to council or to Mayor Jaworski. Just reviewing the wording of the bylaw, the delegate is correct in that it doesn't require a shed within the flankage yard setback. It's within the entire front yard, but it was within the flankage yard setback. So within the distance measured from the flankage yard into the property, which often is around 6 meters. Most of the bylaws, I don't know what specifically it is here, a shed wouldn't be permitted. But if it was in where the house could be constructed in the building envelope with the flankage yard setback, the shed could be located in that area. But where it's positioned at this particular point in time is not in compliance with the bylaw. So it would require a minor variance.
Okay, I think that's...
Clarification, when you say this particular point in time, do you mean this particular point in time as opposed to 2016, or do you that was just a closing remark?
Through your Chair Henry to Mayor Jaworski, these types of regulations are consistent within the old bylaw and the new bylaw, so we've not made any changes to these types of regulations.
Gotcha.
That's helpful. Councillor Maven?
Yes, thank you again. And through you, Chair Henry, since the fee for the variance request permit is about the same as constructing a new shed, is it an option to remove the old shed and put a new shed in instead of having buying a variance permit?
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Maven. There's three options. The first option is to remove the shed. The second option is to relocate the existing shed. And the third option is to apply for a minor variance. Construction of a new shed on the property where it's permitted in a location in the zoning bylaw.
Okay, one follow-up then. You can request a variance, but you aren't necessarily granted the variance.
That's correct. That it would be an application to the Committee of Adjustment, but it's ultimately the committee's decision as to whether they would support the variance or not.
So is the applicant aware that that case may be, and if there are other two options may be preferable?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, I'm not sure exactly the communications between staff and the applicant. I understand the original contact was through municipal enforcement, and as well as some conversations with planning staff, but we do try and outline all the options that are available.
Great, thank you very much.
And certainly they've been outlined today as well. Mr. Rapp?
Yes, if I could just add one further point, and that's waiving of a fee prior to the application. And that is, it's been discussed before that by waiving a fee prior to a decision, it could be seen as prejudicing the committee's decision if council were to waive the fee. That's the one thing I want to remind council of. Thank you.
Councillor Darrell.
Is there what the $500 fee? That's for something else, just a regular. Is there a $500 fee? Am I making that up? A permit for $500? That's possible to staff.
Through you,
Mr.
Chair
Carter.
Henry, to Councillor Durrell. I'm not aware of any $500 fee.
Okay, so I think we have the information before the I'm not seeing any. I would say, Ali, I appreciate submission. It's useful for us to hear some of that. I think it sounds like it was an unfortunate circumstance that your contractor didn't identify this as an issue, and now you're faced with a few options. I think there are a number of people in the city that occasionally come to a decision to approach the Minor Variance Committee for similar reasons that may not have done so in the order that is most helpful, and unfortunately that's not entirely uncommon. But I think you've heard the options that Mr. Crowder had laid out that are available to you in terms of next steps. But waiving the fee isn't something that council today is entertaining. So in response to the request you've made, I think the answer is no. But we appreciate your time and coming forward. Next up, we have an appeal to refund minor variance fees for building a rec room on top of a garage at 71 Euclid Avenue in Waterloo. Mark, please come forward.
Councilors, Chair, Mayor, thank you for your time. My name is Mark Salmoni. You can call me Citizen Mark. I've been in Waterloo since 1992, and I'd like to echo the feelings of Citizen Glenn here before I start. A little bit different than the previous appeal, we've already made our minor variance. Our minor variance has been approved, and my request is to potentially refund that approval. But we're going ahead with our renovation at the moment. My house was built in 1921, and it looks like there was some record of there being a road in front of my house in 1897. Not sure if that was the road we're talking about since it had a different name. Probably was a dirt road. But I guess at first I was wondering if maybe you put the road a little bit too close to my house. But doesn't seem to be the case. This is my house, and that purple box where it says current garage is my current garage. There's a couple lawn chairs up there. The greenery on the edges is a giant vine. But you can see I've kind of drawn a line where my house is, just to give you a sense of how close it is to the sidewalk. And as we kind of blow up or blow out here, you can notice that many houses in the neighborhood are closer to the sidewalk than mine. In fact, Mine may be the furthest away from the sidewalk in the entire road. If we go back to the more zoomed in version, the renovation that we were doing is really just putting a room on top of that flat garage roof. So I wasn't changing the footprint of the house. We're not changing the height of the house. Essentially, we're just putting a floor on top of that. So that's really all I had to say about that. There's one other thing that I thought I'd bring to your attention, is that this house beside me isn't even there anymore. And I think the reason why I think that's interesting is I don't believe that I had to go, or had an opportunity to appeal what that house or builder was doing. They never had to apply for a minor variance. Essentially, they were able to destroy their entire house and rebuild it without any sort of approval from the neighbor or any sort of cost to the city. And I guess I'm just wondering, does the rule of my house being too close to the sidewalk for this particular appeal, does it really make sense in a neighborhood as old as this? Thanks.
So before I turn to council, just for clarity, we see you paid the fee and you listed the item. Was there a decision rendered on your minor variance?
Yes, it was approved. In fact, it was the people that were at that approval who kind of encouraged me to come here. They didn't seem to think that it made a lot of sense, given that I'm not changing the footprint, I'm not changing the height of my house. So it was sort of upon their recommendation that I got here.
By people, you meant your fellow neighbors in the audience?
No, it was the gentlemen that were part of the decision, who were working for the city. I guess they said they were volunteers.
The committee. Okay,
Oh,
that's
sorry, yes.
interesting. Thank you. Are there questions for the delegate, Mr. Mayor Jaworski?
Thank you, through the chair. Now, I drove by there today. It looked like it's a full reconstruction of that garage. Is that the case? Because I saw like the first level is being reconstructed as well as the second level.
There was quite a bit of water damage. I don't know if any of you have flat car roofs, but it's 20 years is all it's supposed to last. It was built in 1984, so there's quite a bit of water damage. So we had to take away a lot of the foundation, or that was a lot of the wood that was wrecked.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. And then with respect to, if you go back in your application slide there.
Like the receipt?
No, the first one. So Sorry. It was your builder who recommended that you do this? Why did you apply? Maybe walk through that process of why you applied in the first place.
Why did I apply for a minor variance?
Yeah.
The city said I had to. So we applied for a permit, and they would not grant me a permit until the minor variance was approved.
Okay. Okay, fair. Thanks.
Councillor Maven, for the delegate?
Yes. If you go back through you, Chair Henry, if you go back to the picture there, okay, the purple box, is that where you're proposing to build the new structure?
True.
So it is going beyond the space of the old structure?
False.
Okay. Can you...
Unless you consider the up direction. But X and
yeah,
Y,
I'm considering
X
where the
and Y
wall...
is the same, Z's higher.
This box is bigger than the garage.
Your box is bigger than the garage. That's a good way of saying it. Yes.
Yeah.
True.
Okay, so you're not really going to use all that space in that purple box?
No, that purple box is my garage. It just doesn't look like my purple garage because I have so many vines growing over it. So that whole part on the left hand is actually that giant weed that grows on my house.
So Google has pixelated some of his garage.
Yeah. But the purple box
Google
is exactly what is there today, or was there a couple weeks ago anyways.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the delegate before I take possession of this and we maybe ask questions of staff? Seeing none, thank you very much, Citizen Mark.
Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate your time. Are there any questions of staff? It's Mayor Jaworski, then Councillor Duro.
Okay, to staff. I've seen so now that we've seen the presentation, I would just like staff to walk through why they're, it seems to be a valid requirement, but maybe staff could walk through the requirement of why a visit to the Committee of Adjustment was necessary.
Mr. Cotter?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Mayor Jaworski. as part of the building permit submission, the building department does a zoning check in terms of its requirements for compliance with applicable law, and identified that the proposed structure to be built was not in compliance with the zoning bylaw. So it's not uncommon for within these heritage areas to be legal non-conforming, so they don't necessarily meet the zoning standards. Now, the zoning that was existing under bylaw 1108 and under the current bylaw would be virtually the same. We really haven't changed the zoning regulations, but the property was recognized in 1986 by the Committee of Adjustment, at which time they recognized the frontage on the property, and they also provided relief for the side yard to allow a second or two-story addition to be constructed. And you can see behind the main part of the structure on the drawing that's on the screen, there's a smaller section to the left that's also green roof. That was the two-story addition that the Committee of Adjustment approved in 1996. But their decision was very specific to just that addition. So the intention there, which is what the Committee of Adjustment often does, to say if you want to build further extensions or further additions, you need to return to the committee and get permission to do that. So in this case, there is a one-story garage there, but to build that second story above it, they would have to return to the Committee of Adjustment to get zoning approval, which would then allow the building permit to be issued. So hopefully that provides clarity. If there's further questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Councillor Durrell.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. So, but there, normally, if it wasn't a legal non-conforming building, they would just need a permit, correct?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Durrell, if they were in compliance with the zoning bylaw, they would just need a building permit.
Right. And so the reason why it's almost triple the cost is because the building that was already there was built as legal non-conforming, correct? Without using my bylaw talk.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Durrell, the existing structure is situated a certain distance from the property line, which is non-conforming to the bylaw, which under the Planning Act, Section 45 of the Planning Act requires relief through the Committee of Adjustment to legalize the zoning on the property to allow building permits to be issued. So it's a requirement of the Planning Act.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
And I'd observe it is not uncommon for Committee of Adjustment to be filled with such agenda items and requests for recognizing existing situations. At least that's my 8 years of experience reading those packets. That is a large portion of what we see, particularly the uptown.
Is it appropriate for me to make a comment?
Sure. I'll look. Are there any other questions of staff before we get into discussion? Seeing none, go ahead, please.
So I would, I hesitate to say it, but I do believe many of the homes, especially in Uptown West and Mary Ellen, have a lot of legal non-conforming issues with them. And one of the struggles is that the housing prices are rising. MPAC is very quick to assess all of these homes at far greater value than they were when we all bought them. And the issue that's having is we'd like to keep families in Uptown. I mean, that's a big part of I think what we're trying to create here. And my worry is that it is far cheaper to sell your home in Uptown right now and move to the suburbs. And we're making it difficult for people to renovate their homes. And so my ask to this council is that I hope that the homeowners would be willing to pay a permit of $500, but I would like to suggest that this minor variance be given back. I'll just put that out there.
So you are making the suggestion, Councillor Durrell, to refund the minor variance, very specifically. Okay. Are there other councillors that are so interested it would take a second to...
Oh, but I'd also like to put the condition, because I think originally that's what they were okay to do, is pay for a $500 permit.
My understanding is the permit fee and the minor variance fee are two different
so
two different fees that are not related.
You've already paid for the permit fee. Okay, so then just... Yeah.
So we could entertain that as a motion. It would require a seconder to be on the floor to be debated. I am, no, Councillor Maven is seconding it. I think Councillor Durrell's made her comments. Are there any other comments from the table? Councillor Freeman.
My challenge is that that permit fee is related to the process, and this house did have to go through the process. And the process costs money in terms of preparing a staff report, distributing materials, and all of those kinds of things. And I'm sorry, but it's not just in Uptown where houses are being reassessed and where people don't feel as though they can afford to live. And so I think we're either going to withdraw this fee across the whole city, which I don't think we're going to do. At least I'm not prepared to do that today. Because we can't do one-offs. We can't be a council of one-offs on stuff like this, because there's lots and lots of people that apply. They pay the fee, their application is approved by the committee, and if every approval gets a refund, we may as well not have a committee. So I can't do this. This is absolutely happening all through my ward. And if you want us to revisit the fee and the process of the fee, I'm happy to do that, but I can't do it as a one-off.
Looking to other members of council who want to get in on this conversation before I go back to the mover. Councillor Veith.
Chair Henry, we'd have folks in here all the time, and yeah, and if we look at the process, that's fine, but I can't support what's on the floor right now. So, thank you.
Other members looking to get in on the conversation? Councillor Durrell, did you want to come back with?
I think the issue isn't okay. I think part of, for me, what is the difference maker here is that a lot of the homes in Uptown are non-conforming, whereas when we look at homes that were like designed by a suburb developer, they had all of these things taken care of. These homes were made at different times and sometimes in different decades, and so we're going to see more of those. And I think it's just important that we continue to how do I put this nicely? If we're nickeling and diming the people in the urban homes, it's easier for them to move out, and I think we need to protect that integrity.
Councillor Maven, and then looks like I'll close debate.
Okay. And thank you, Chair Henry. The way I'm seeing it is all we're doing is building, all the applicant is doing is building the structure over top of where an existing structure already exists. And applying for the building permit is great. I'm not sure what variance is actually being required here. I know that it was explained, but somehow or another it went right through me. So if we're just replacing the existing building with a little bit bigger building, a higher building, if you will, that matches the house anyway, I don't see an issue with this being a one-off or being a standard for future bylaw variances.
Thank you, Mr. Maven. I couldn't say it better.
So it's useful to have conversations about these. There's certainly things that are changing in the city. There are portions of the city that were built pre-zoning. I think the historic area was built pre-zoning, and many other folks for whom in certain parts of the city were built in a particular way, and zoning may have updated since that's come to pass. So legal nonconforming is a reality in this municipality and in every municipality, particularly in historic areas, and so is common and pervasive and not exceptional and unique. If this were exceptional and unique, I may have a different take on it, but it is common and pervasive. And if we have a common and pervasive situation, that's where policy comes in. And policy here is the Committee of Adjustment has a fee as a cost recovery effort, so the general public as a whole does not pay for individual applications from individual sites. That is why we charge user fees. for certain services in the city, and this is one. If council wishes to reduce the size of that user fee or the share between individual pay versus everybody pay, or reduce it to nothing and have everybody pay rather than the individual initiating it, that's a budget request, in my view, that should come through the normal order of those processes, which could identify the financial impact of that, and council could budget for it with an associated impact on the property tax, because that's where we'd fund it from. So I'm not inclined to support a one-off for something that is common and pervasive, and that we see regularly, at least one of, in every committee of adjustment agenda that people are seeking. So there's a broader policy change some people may want. There's avenues to pursue that, and I wouldn't do it through a one-off procedure. So I think we've got around the horn. I think we're ready for the vote. All those in favor of Councillor Durrell's motion to waive the fee? Sue, all those opposed? That's Whaley, Veith, myself, Jaworski, and Freeman. That motion fails. Thank you. I appreciate for coming. I hope there's a helpful discussion on the challenges that that we face and some of the considerations that we come in for. And now here's something truly unique for the eight years I've spent on council: an appeal of fence variance decision from the Appeals Tribunal for a fence built at 262 Old Abbey Road in Waterloo. I see one delegation on my docket, and that's Martin Kyle. Are there other delegations I should be aware of, clerks? Oh, and then there's a delegation on that. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I'm reading this. So Morton and Swanee Globus, I see this as read as the delegation, as the initial appellant. And I see Martin Kyle as the original applicant. Before we begin, and I lay out some ground rules, because this is a bit different than a council meeting, a normal council meeting. Are there any other persons in the audience that believe they should be a party to this conversation today that would wish to speak to it? If so, Martin's wife, Laura. So Martin. Okay. So the reason I call that is just so we get a sense of the number of people coming to the podium for all of that. And who is the lady with her other hand up? Can you identify yourself? What's your name, ma'am?
Yes, I'm 598 Rustic Drive.
Okay. So what we're about to, thank you very much. So that's it. So what we're going to enter into here is an appeals session, which will look a little bit different, both than the original Fence Variance Committee meeting and different than a regular council meeting. Delegates will have up to 10 minutes, and I say up to for a reason, to present information they have. They can then field and respond to questions from council. Should at any point in the proceeding after you're done, council seek additional information that provides new information to the conversation, I will provide at the end a wrap-up opportunity for those delegates to comment on that information, so council has all of the information necessary for it to make a fair and judicious decision on whether or not to grant the appeal, to uphold the original decision, or to uphold the original decision with additional conditions that were not originally provided. So there will only be 10 minutes for people to present and respond to questions that we hear. If that makes sense to folks, I believe we can then begin. And we would begin with Morton and Swanee Globus as the appellant. So you have up to 10 minutes. Please begin when ready.
Respected Mayor, Chair Henry, and members of council, we, Morton and Swanee Globus, have lived at 625 Rustic Drive, that you can see on the screen, for a period of 33 years, since 1985. Our home and property is part of the Colonial Acres subdivision, where we have created In our view, a model green environment in keeping with the rustic nature of the community. In order to enhance the openness and green space we all share and enjoy, the hundreds of homeowners in this community have adhered to this vision and have zealously kept front yards free of fences. This is not simply an issue of diverse opinions of two neighbors, but is especially an issue of the long-standing neighborhood standard and open space vision of the community. These shared goals are supported here by a signed petition I hold in my hand from 60 homeowners, 5 pages, who vigorously oppose fences in front yards. This petition has been registered in the clerk's office. That we, the homeowners, are dismayed by the erection of a 5 to 6 foot fence, it varies depending where in the yard, in front yard space. So this is front yard, looking at our living room window. This is an understatement. The fence aggressively protrudes into rustic yard front yard space, well in front of the building line, some 50 feet. It overturns the collective and long-standing community standard adhered to conscientiously by the residents for over 34 years of keeping front yard space free of fences. The fence photos presented by the Kyles in a document for this council meeting are misleading in that they attempt to show that there are fences like theirs in front yards all over the neighborhood. Nothing could be further from the truth, as the central issue is not whether homeowners put fencing on their properties, but where the fencing is placed. I'm going to show you a series of front yards in the community to show the ambiance of our neighborhood. So I'll go through them quickly. If you look at them, you could see that this is one on Eastgate Walk, and you could see if you look down, and it's the same on both sides. I didn't take a million pictures because we don't have the time, but there are no fences in front yards on Eastgate Walk. This is Rosebriar Court, also about a block away from where we live. No fences in front yards in any of the properties. This is another part of Rosebriar Court. No fences in any part of the properties. This is Rustic Drive, the street that we live on. And let me go back here. The fencing scenarios that the Kyles point out in their document are not at all similar to the portion of their fence in question. It's like comparing apples and pineapples. As an example, here on Rustic Drive, this is the front yard at 618 Rustic Drive, curiously cited by the Kyles. Where is the fence in the front yard? I ask. Clearly, it has a wide open front yard with a fence that is between houses. I can point it out for you. The fence is here, and it runs between houses, a fairly long fence because they have a half-acre property, but it doesn't jut out into the front yard. Clearly, it has a wide open front yard with a fence between houses correctly on the building line and not jutting out into front yard space. In contrast, the Kyles fence aggressively intrudes into Rustic Drive front yard space in front of my living room window, well ahead of the Rustic Drive building line. And I'll speak about the building line quite a bit. I wonder if I can, I guess that perhaps that's large enough. Okay, this is a sketch that I made from a survey of my lot. So this is my lot here, and this is our Rustic Drive home, and this is the survey that we originally got. This is a sketch that I made reasonably in proportion of the Kyle's property, which is address on 262 Old Abbey Road. The fence that I'm talking about at the present time runs from the side of their house 6 feet along the side of that property, and then between our properties all the way out about 189 feet in total. Out to the front of the house, it's about 135 feet or 140 feet. The part of the fence that I'm disputing, that we're disputing, is the part that juts out in front of the building line. So this is the building line for Rustic Drive, this is the building line for Old Abbey, and this part juts out about 50 feet along Rustic Drive and then back to the house. This juts out in front of our views, and I will talk about that quite a bit. The fence as it stands presents us with an eyesore when looking out through the front living room window. Isn't this what the drafters of the bylaw sought to prevent? It also diminishes the value of our property. This is a view from our living room window without the fence. That was a photo my wife took last winter. And you could see it looks out over Rustic Drive. You could see going off to the right is Old Abbey Road. And so the Kyle's property would be in this area before the fence. This is the same view from our living room window with the camera pressed up against the glass, looking out in the same direction. This is Rustic Drive, going out in that direction. This is Old Abbey Road, and this is their property. You can see that the fence posts had already gone in. And this is after the fence is erected. Again, you could see Rustic Drive hidden from view, Old Abbey Road hidden from view, and a fence that I believe is 5 feet along this property line and then goes back up to higher. I haven't measured it. I haven't gone on their property, 6 or 7 feet. This is another view from our living room window. Again, you can see that it's right in our face. This is a photo that I believe the Kyles also have a similar photo in their portfolio, taken from the corner, looking back at the fence. And so this is the Kyles' house with the side all brick, and this is our house. You can see that our living room window is there, and the fence blocks off the whole view, whereas the Kyle has a free front yard. Their view is not blocked. And the fence, in fact, is completely out of view for the Kyles. They don't see it at all. It hardly seems right that the questionable portion of the fence is not at all visible from the neighbor's home, but it dominates the scene from our front living room window. It creates a glaring and offensive wall, not only for us, the immediate neighbors, but also for others to endure. It is worthy to point out that the 6 previous owners at 262 Old Abbey Road all kept to the community standard, did not fence the area in question. In fact, there is no other case in the community, in the entire community, where a fence juts out into a living room view in such an offensive way. It is not justifiable, and as pointed out by many neighbors, it simply is not right. I should point out that our long-standing community standard has been in keeping with the City of Waterloo fence bylaw that restricts the height of fences in yard space designated front yard. That is, beyond the building lines, in advance of the building lines. We and the many homeowners in our community are troubled that the city bylaw, established for good reason, is not being defended by the very enforcement vehicles put there by the city to enforce the bylaw. I'm back to the sketch. With regard to the very important issue of city regulations with respect to pool safety, because this is how it started, the cows have a pool in the backyard. We recognize that safety is paramount. That was never an issue with us. Equally, it is important to emphasize that fencing the front yard portion of that property out to the Rustic Drive property line is not at all necessary to effectively close off the backyard pool area and to meet the required safety standards of the city. So now if we look here, we can see that this is the pool location at the very backyard, at the very back of the yard. The pool is there, and there's an iron fence around the pool, well protected. In addition, a 6-foot solid fence from the side of the house, around the side, along the properties, out to the front. So the issue is, in order to protect the safety around the pool, is it necessary to go all the way out to the culvert, out to the limits of the property? I've lost my arrow. Is it necessary to go all the way out to the limits of the property in order to close off the pool area? My suggestion at the variance committee meeting was that the fence could run whatever the height of the fence that was required by the city, to 5 feet, along the building line to the building line of Old Abbey, and that would close off the pool area quite significantly. As it now stands, with the iron fence and 6-foot fence protects the pool, the real question is, where do you complete the enclosure? And that's really the crux of our argument. Other residents in the area have achieved the desired pool safety by fencing up to the respective building lines, but not fencing into front yard space. Surely safety is ensured by having an iron fence inside of a 6-foot wooden fence in the backyard.
Martin, I have you at 30 seconds over, so if you could wrap up, please, and then we'll go to questions.
It more than satisfies the safety regulations and doesn't necessitate extending the fence to the front limits of the property. I want to very quickly, because I know that the Kyles have identified it, circumstances around a fence that Kyles uses as an example. That's 263 Whistler Road. Cited by them also needs to be clarified. The original half-acre lot was severed in order to create a new lot more than 15 years ago, leaving an approximately 3-meter backyard with the original home.
Martin, this doesn't sound like you're wrapping up. It sounds like you've got more to speak to, and you're at 11 minutes.
I had one sentence and then a summary, if I may, please. I'm 80 years old. I hope you give me a little bit of a...
I will allow it rather than divert, and we'll assume it was answers to one of the questions people ask. Your one sentence and then your summary.
Yes. That in itself, it was an anomaly, the severance. To further compound the error, a 6-foot fence in the deemed front yard was permitted at a later time. This property is not in Colonial Acres North, perhaps not subject to the same standards, but it should be regarded as the anomaly that it is, and not an example that should be emulated. In summary, we strongly feel that the fencing requirement for pools would be well served with a 5-foot fence limited to the Rustic Drive and Old Abbey Road building lines. As it stands, the fence is an eyesore, presents an unwanted wall from our front window view. It adversely alters the open character of our neighborhood. It sets a worrisome precedent and will have a lasting and detrimental impact on the community. In light of the reasoning presented here, and with the strong support of the petitioning residents in the neighborhood, we appeal to the council, in good faith, to give due and serious consideration to the removal of the aforementioned 5 to 6 foot fence that exists beyond the building lines in front yard space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will look to members of council for questions that they may have of you at this time. Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair. You mentioned a number of times the term community standards. Is that just based on observations, or are you speaking of something more firm than observations?
It originally was enshrined in a document with Colonial Acres North subdivision, which apparently was to run for something like 40 years and has lapsed. So it originally was enshrined, but the people have very, very diligently kept that standard. If you walk around the neighborhood, you don't find one fence in a front yard sitting in front of somebody's living room window. It's just not done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Martin? Seeing none, Martin, that was very thorough. I appreciate appreciate your presentation. Morton? Why did I write down Martin? Okay, that's why. I thought it was two Martins. Sorry, Morton Globus. Yes, there it is. I did not have much sleep last night. Okay, so next up, Martin and Laura Kyle, please come forward. I will say you also have 10 minutes. If you happen to use 12, it would be a matter of fairness for me to grant it.
Excuse me, I'm just getting my computer set up here. Welcome to the neighborhood. Your worship, fellow city councilors, Chair Henry, fellow city employees. I'd like to introduce you to my family, our 4-year-old son, Olson Keel, recent graduate of Butterfly Daycare, current student at Lester B. Pearson School in Eastbridge, my expectant wife, Laura, employee at Economical Insurance, and myself, Martin Keel, an employee at Libro Credit Union. Why are we here today? We're still unsure, but we're not happy. We have remained largely silent throughout this fence variance process, acknowledging our neighbors' concerns, but reiterating our right to follow a process. A due process which has included the advice and consultation of a number of stakeholders at the city, as well as being cordial with neighbors' opinions from the start. In January earlier this year, we were thrilled to upgrade our home from our previous home in the University Downs neighborhood to accommodate our growing family when we put in an offer that was accepted at 262 Old Abbey. As mentioned, this is a home that is at a corner lot at Old Abbey Road and Rustic Drive. One of the things that appealed to us was this was a 1/3 of an acre lot with a matured tree neighborhood that the house resides in. Both Laura and I, growing up with pools when we were younger, were thrilled with the opportunity to put a pool in a large lot, which our previous home could not accommodate, as well as providing a safe place for our 4-year-old son, our expectant son, and our black lab dog to play. Unsure of the reasons why the current side lot was not fenced in, we engaged with city officials to understand if there were any restrictions. We came to understand that due to the unique shape of our lot, our front yard was considered our side yard, and our side yard considered our front yard. Based on the current layout, we would have technically been able to build a 6-foot fence directly in front of our house, which we don't believe our neighbors would have appreciated. Prior to any variance discussions and in casual conversations with our neighbor about replacing a 30-plus-year-old rickety fence, we were advised that the fence was fine and were showed that he had fashioned metal rods to hold the fence up. Additionally, on a couple of occasions, we were advised that the fence was ours and ours alone, which we took to insinuate that he had no intention of splitting the replacement cost of the fence with us. While a pool was always in the plan, a fence was not. Upon applying for a pool permit, we engaged with city fence bylaw official Alex Semple to ensure that we were following the due process. We came to understand that our existing back dilapidated fence did not meet code due to height and spacing requirements. Despite numerous tree branches as well as dead tree branches from the Globus property coming over our fence, we were asked to remove bushes crawling under the fence. As planning moved forward, we were also advised that we wouldn't be able to achieve a deep end in our backyard because the water table is too low, and that we would have to preserve a natural swale between our two properties. When we confirmed our pool construction in July, we began to investigate fence options and further engage with city officials. We believe that there's minimal interruption because of the tree lines from front to back on the Globus's property that, as you can see, would provide minimal interruption. I spoke to Morton about our intentions to pointing to an approximation of where we thought we might build. At first, no concerns were raised, but he did ask for us to move the fence line away from the swale between our two properties. Furthermore, we were asked later on we were asked not to build a fence, and then pointed to other examples in the neighborhood in which fences were described as hideous and out of place. We were also reminded that the Globuses have lived in the neighborhood for 30 plus years, and on top of fences, other things such as sheds were previously disallowed, but now people have disobeyed that and continue to move forward. I advised Morton that we acknowledge his opinion, but it's still our desire to move through the process. On August 30th, we met with the Appeals Tribunal, presented our case, and later in September received approval. Our pool and fence started to be built in September. We received multiple complaints from our pool contractor and fence installation company about our interference and arguments of our build with the family. After the appeal was filed by the Globuses, our counselor Diane Freeman was engaged by both our family and the Globuses for support. Diane asked that we consider reducing our fence from the approved 6-foot variance to 4 feet. We rejected the idea due to pool fence height restrictions at 5 feet, as well as privacy concerns on a corner lot, but called Diane back to ask if a compromise would be satisfactory of 5 feet in our side yard. Diane acknowledged a compromise, advised us support, and let us know that we would make the Globuses aware. We found out later that the Globuses rejected the 5 feet compromise, which is why we're here today. After learning this past Thursday night that our neighbor has secretly gone through the process of soliciting 30 plus homes for signatures as part of a petition, we are generally left with a feeling of a malicious attempt to put a black stain on our house and our family. We believe strongly that this is a narcissistic approach filled with a perverse belief that their tenure in the neighborhood provides the right to dictate not only to us but also to others what they can and can't do on their properties. With additional obscure beliefs unknown to most that there are special rules written for a specific subsection of original neighborhood in North Colonial Acres from the 1980s. We are a family that has given a lot back to our community through our volunteer time, our charitable contributions, and through a number of work-related events. We will not stand for our family to be dragged through the mud of a silly petition where we're made to feel unwelcome in a neighborhood in which we plan to set up roots for the next 30 to 40 years. Unsure of what was shared in the Globuses, by the Globuses to the neighborhood, we gave a lot of consideration to counteracting this petition this weekend to share our side of the story with our neighbors. A story which includes transparency about our intentions, following a due process with advice and consultation by city officials, not asking for remuneration from the Globuses where a shared offense is appropriate, rebuilding a previous fence on our property line only, a conciliatory approach with a compromise in which our councillor asked us to reduce our fence approval from 6 to 4 feet, and numerous other examples with side lots in North Colonial Acres, and other neighboring neighborhoods. Ultimately, we decided that a counter petition was petty. We felt it would exacerbate the situation, wouldn't give us any satisfaction to paint our neighbors with a negative image, regardless of how much our neighbors disagree with us or wish to drag us down. This petition was distributed only after the Globuses received the answers they did not want, despite a notice going out ahead of time to neighbors informing of the variance request. We did, however, feel it was necessary to understand where our closest neighbors stood with respect to support, and in a short period of time this weekend, canvassed homes directly around ours to ask and share the following. Did we do something that you found offensive? And did you receive the variance request notice? We explained that we went through a due process with the city, asked if they were aware of a petition that was circulated, and if they supported the right to put up our fence, felt comfortable, and if they felt comfortable, would mind providing their contact information's name and potentially a letter of support. On this map is our home here where I'm showing. This is the Globus property. The stars are surrounding homes that have provided letters of support or acknowledgements of support for the fence that we have. Running through a few examples, their next door neighbors, Richard and Hillary Walsh. We support the fence at 262 Old Abbey. We'd like to note that our fence, which runs along the Globus' driveway, starts at 5.5 feet. In building of their home, they were forced to plant 4 trees by the Globus' due to the removal of another tree on their property. Stephen and Spencer Stroska, 260 Old Abbey. We think you did a great job with the fence and looks very good. It makes ours look not very good. Daryl Kramer, we support the right to have the fence. Ron Kreshnick, it's ridiculous. I wouldn't support the petition. You have the right to do what you want on your property. Shannon Spink, 618 Rustic, we're very happy for you. I think it's a great use of the side yard, which wasn't usually well maintained by previous owners and wasn't a suitable space for kids. Additionally, I was asked to read 2 letters by supporting neighbors. One from 263 Whistler Road, which was referenced as the not meeting standards. I apologize, I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. Dear Martin and Laura Keel, as well as members of the committee, as corner lots in Colonial Acres, both of our houses have larger side yards that in all practical terms form a significant portion of our overall usable yard space, and as such make complete sense to be fenced in with the same standard of fence that the rear yard is. As you are another growing family with young children, we fully support your right and decision to the fence variance you're granted approval for, and do not feel it in any way, shape, or form negatively impacts the natural aesthetic beauty of the neighborhood. I'm very sorry to hear that you're having the exact same issue with your neighbors, Morton and Swanee Globus, that we had when we put up a fully bylaw compliant fence on our side a few years ago. As a family with 2 children living on a corner lot with a fair amount of traffic, we did not feel safe having our young active children outside with a fenced yard to allow them to run and play freely. We therefore chose to erect a tasteful legal fence to enclose the rear portion of our side yard without extending it beyond the front facing of the house. Mr. Globus still opted to approach my pregnant wife and accost, insult, and intimidate her with threats of legal issues, bylaw requirements, and sightline concerns, even though none of this was valid or responsible. In the end, we chose to alter the fence line to angle a corner portion of it to allow for enhanced sightlines as a compromise. Mr. Globus' self-imposed role as the neighborhood standards watchdog is both arrogant and offensive, a colossal waste of municipal government's time and money, and the antithesis of what a community-minded, supportive neighbor should act like. His generalization to our fence in the residents' view is quite attractive and not to be held up as a model of neighborhood standards is misleading and accurate, as we've received many compliments on the fence. Mr. Globus' assertion that we are not in the same subdivision and the rules may have been different for us is illogical, as we live across the street from him. In summary, we fully support the Keels approved fence variance and do not think any adjustments to the construction should be made. An additional letter from a home on 251 Whistler Road that share a backyard with the Globuses, and I apologize, this is difficult to read. This is in regards to the fence at 262 Old Abbey Road. We, Heather and Lloyd Johnson, are the owners of 251 Whistler Road. We have owned our home since September 2013. In 2014, we had a pool and a fence installed in our yard. Our backyard backs onto Swanee and Morton Globus' backyard. During our pool installation, we had several issues with the Globuses. They made it clear to us that they had lived a considerable length of time and had planted 100+ trees on their property. The Globuses advised us that they were not fond of pools, fences, and cutting down of any trees, regardless of whether or not they were dead and could cause harm. Our installation crew had told us on several occasions that Morton would come into the yard and give them a hard time. We had to speak to him about this, as we would also be liable if he was injured while on our property. The fence at 262 Old Abbey is very aesthetically pleasing, and we are in full support keeping as is. This fence serves as a purpose in keeping their family and pets safe. It is very disheartening when you go through the proper channels and do everything by the book to have to deal with this nonsense. In summary, we'd like to ask, do you give consideration? We've been in the neighborhood for 6 months, that we have an already approved application by the city, the impact that a reverse decision would have on future applications, an approved fence at 6 feet, the potential punitive cost of the decision, our right to privacy, and use of our property to keep our young children and dogs safe, a conciliatory approach and measured approach to engage in a due process, and numerous other examples of properties that we've provided in your package. While I wrap up, we'd like to make one thing clear. This is not a game to us. And we'd like to have further consideration from the city for our fence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also quite thorough. Any questions from, before you depart the podium for both of you, are there any questions for the delegate from members of council? Seeing none, thank you very much. Wanted to make sure you didn't get up and down. Are there questions for staff arising from these? I do note that I had one other individual who had indicated they wish to be a party and make a representation to council. Mayor, did you want to ask your question now or wait until after that? Now? Okay, perfect. That works for me. Mayor Jaworski for staff.
So I just want further clarity before we move on. So based on the decision of the Appeals Tribunal, as I read here, the side yard that most of us would think is a side yard is considered the front yard because it is the shortest lot line. I'm not sure if I'm asking to Joel or to the team here, but that's what I'm reading here. The only reason that that's considered the side yard, which I see it as, is considered the front yard is because the shortest lot line. is that case, because it's an irregularly shaped lot.
I'll look to municipal enforcement since they interpret and enforce. Well, they enforce at least.
Through you,
Mr. Mehta?
Chair Henry, to Mayor Jaworski. That is correct. It's the shorter of the two lot lines, so it's considered the front yard. So the side facing Old Abbey is the flankage yard.
Yes.
And the front yard is the area that abuts Rustic Court.
And so, and I also read here that the committee had to decide that if they could vary it from a 3-foot fence, which was permitted. So any in Waterloo can have up to a 3-foot fence regardless, as right.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Mayor Jaworski, that is correct.
Thank you.
Of,
If the Mr. Globus came and asked to build a fence in his front yard, exactly parallel to the fence that's been built, would he be permitted to do that?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. Yes, he would be permitted to do it. And in fact, he could, on that lot in particular, what is legally defined as his flankage yard, he could put up a 6-foot fence. And then along the...
right to the street?
Right to the street, yeah. Yes.
I just want to clarify, is that, as he used the word flankage yard, Mr. Mehta, I just want to confirm which yards there are. Mr. Mehta? Order. The way I laid out procedure, which is a procedure that I've been advised by legal counsel is the appropriate and only procedure I can use in this case, is to permit delegations which I identified to speak for up to 10 minutes. I did provide some flexibility so you could finish. Questions from council. Council has an opportunity to ask questions of staff. Should new information come through those questions, I will provide an opportunity at the end for the original delegations to offer some council has ready to summarize at the end. That's how I've been advised this has to proceed and would proceed for any case that we had before us. So, Mr. Mehta, I just wanted to clarify the yards that we were speaking of for Mr. Globus per Councillor Maven's question. You used the term flankage yard. Is there a flankage yard that Mr. Globus has in this case?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Councillor Maven, could you just repeat the question? I just want to make sure.
If Mr. Globus came and wanted to build a fence, from the front of his house to the road, parallel to the one that was erected, would he be permitted to do that?
Yes, up to 3 feet.
3 feet. Isn't it somewhat ironic that that two fences, same area, going the same direction, one can be 3 feet and the other can be 6 feet, and they can be right beside each other? And I know that's what you're saying our rules are, but something doesn't seem right.
Let me try to interpret Councillor Maven's question and the answer from Mr. Mehta. The applicant in the originating procedure sought a variance because they were only permitted to build to 3 feet, exactly the same as Morton would be permitted. But because they sought and received a variance, which is now before for council on appeal, they were permitted to construct a fence 6 feet high. If Mr. Globus had received similar disposition from the committee, we can interpret, given the decision of the committee, if it was upheld by council, where would that fence normally be constructed? Would it be on the property line and therefore effectively be the same fence at the same height per the variance that was done? Is that correct?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven, that is correct.
Okay, so the example that was used showing, I think the Aldworths were the name, they had a similar situation, and the same answer would be that they could, both parties could build, neighbors, could build a 3-foot fence, but the variance was given so that they could build a 5 or 6 foot fence.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. That is correct.
Okay, now you ready for the next one?
Right.
If Mr. Globus came and said, I want to build a 6-foot fence, and I'd like to get a variance for that, could he get it?
Where?
In this front yard.
Okay.
What's to the street, from his house to the street.
So we're going back and forth here, which is not helpful. We should make it to question to folks that can interpret zoning and bring clarity and a response to Councillor Maven's question through the chair.
If I'm misunderstanding.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. It's hard to provide exact options for Mr. Globus's property in that situation. We'd have to take a look at it and determine. But there may be variance options available to Mr. Globus if he chose to build above the permitted heights. But we'd have to take a look at that.
And for the sake of clarity, it's been suggested that I have my lot disoriented. What I thought was the front window of the Globus property. Is that the front window, the one I could see looking at the corner?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Maven. That is correct. That's his front one. That's,
So that's
Mr.
his front
Globus's
yard.
front
Okay.
yard.
Are there other questions for members of staff from members of council? I will have one. If I'm seeing none from around the horseshoe. Councillor Freeman? Through the mic and...
I think there's confusion on how these homes are orientated. At least there is in my mind's eye. Is it possible to bring up a Google image for clerks to bring up a Google image of this intersection of Old Abbey and Rustic? Because I do have a couple of questions of staff, and I do think they're easier to just point to the screen if that's okay.
I do agree that not everyone is a word learner. Sometimes visual learners can benefit from exhibits.
And yeah, if you can turn the satellite on, please. And then if you can just reduce the left-hand image. Perfect. So my question is this. This is the property in question. Staff deemed this as a blanket yard. Without a variance, would this homeowner be permitted to build a 6-foot fence on this blanket yard?
Yes, 6-foot fence is permitted on the flankage yard there.
For the whole length? And then this is their rear backyard. So would they be permitted on, this would be deemed their rear yard, would they be permitted to build a 6-foot fence on their
building line, and then it would be 6 fence, correct? 3 feet.
So all we're talking about is this piece right here.
I think that's the wrong building line, Councillor Freeman.
Well, this is
Are you?
the house on
Yeah.
Old Abbey, it faces on Old Abbey. This is the Globus's house, it faces onto Rustic. The Globus's front window is right here. And they're talking about sightlines from this window on an angle of Rustic, and I'm saying there could be a 6-foot fence on the flank yard. There could be 6 feet to here, and then 3 feet all the way around, right? Without a variance.
That is correct.
So what we're really talking about is 2 feet from here. 2 feet difference. Is it 3? No, from 3 feet to 5 feet, because Mr. Keel lowered his fence to 5 feet in an effort to try to be respectful to the Globuses.
I would. I'm still waiting to. I see a lot of conversation at the table with folks, and I'd look if there's a response to Councillor Freeman's suggestion.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman. That is correct. There's a 2-foot discrepancy between what's permitted in that in that area, the lot in question, and the current structure that's there right now.
Does that assist, Councillor Maven, in terms of the geography?
I think it just emphasizes the fact that there's some issues with the rules we have, because again, the Globuses from the front of their house to the street can build 3 feet. If they went to the sign variance committee, or fence variance committee, sorry, and asked for a variance, the question would be, would they be granted it? Because it's a front yard. And I'd suggest they wouldn't, but I don't know. That's not my call. I'm just pointing out the fact our rules are part of the problem.
I want to be careful about getting into something that could be seen as discussion before we finished hearing these, and I would caution folks to. I think there have been some, sincere efforts at clarification that went into that, but I want to cut it off there because I have a feeling we'll pick that up later. Are there other questions of members of staff? So, the question I have, I think we've been quite clear. This is not just a corner lot that the applicant has, but an irregular shaped corner lot. It's not a rectangle. It's got some bend to it. And because of the way the zoning bylaw is written, the shortest frontage is the front yard, and so therefore the longer frontage is the flankage yard. What I heard from the applicant was something I want to confirm with staff. So not new, but it's that they would be permitted in what is the flankage yard, but I think to them every day driving and walking into their house is their front yard, notwithstanding what the zoning bylaw says. They would be permitted to erect a 6-foot fence along Old Abbey Road in front of their garage and in front of their front door up until the building line without a variance, and that would intrude into the view from their own living room, but is 100% permitted by the zoning bylaw as written. Do I have that correct? Because that's what that's what Martin had suggested. I want to confirm that staff's understanding as well.
Chair Henry, that is correct. 6-foot fence permitted along the flankage.
Intruding into the visual space of their living room. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions at this time for members of staff? If not, I'll go to the last individual identified as a delegate, and then I will offer some opportunity, since I think there have been some things that have come up, a brief opportunity for the delegates to speak again. Seeing no further questions at this time, Eleanor, I didn't catch your last name, but you had suggested you wish to participate in this hearing as a delegate, so I am happy to provide you with 10 minutes. Eleanor, 598 Rustic Drive. Yes. So I invite you to, since you had requested, to attend the podium and provide input that you have into this process. And I want to be clear, this is an opportunity for Eleanor to present her case, and is not Mr. Morton is not another opportunity for you to delegate at this time. Eleanor, please go ahead.
I really oppose a fence up at that corner. It's very dangerous. Coming down Old Abbey onto Rustic, you really have to watch the traffic there. So I don't think there should be a fence there.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Eleanor? Seeing none, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I have one question for staff. Is there any questions for Eleanor? Seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you for coming and presenting your information to Council in this hearing. Question I have for staff arising from Eleanor's testimony. I know that sight lines and safety are one of the three considerations that the Fence Variance Committee, the staff, the Fence Variance Committee, and now this Council on Appeal have to give. Can you speak to what that would entail? What is staff's view? And I know it's being presented in a written arrangement here, but can you confirm staff's view of the safety implications, if any, of the fence that are here? What does staff consider, and what is the case in this instance?
Through you, Chair Henry, I have been out to the property to inspect the yard subsequent to the construction of the fence, and I can attest to the fact that there is no visual obstruction at the corner there of Rustic and Old Abbey. I have seen it myself, and I'm satisfied with that.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions at this time for staff, and because Council asked questions of staff that may have, in the minds of delegates, raised new information, I will provide each delegate with an opportunity to make a final submission as a wrap-up to Council, and then at that time we will consider the matter at hand. So I will begin. If there's no order that I have to do this with, then I take the same order we had before. And so, Morton, Mr. Globus, please do approach the podium, and if you have further submissions or comments based on what you heard in terms of new information that came up.
I wonder if I could have that Google map again of the corner. I am an academic, and I study things very, very thoroughly. And I know that the councillors do the very best that they can. They don't live in the immediate neighborhood. I feel that I would like to add a few things of my knowledge from my studies that might bring some light to it. Councillor Maven brought up a point that I myself raised, and that is that if I attempted to put up a 6-foot fence out to the property line, out to the culvert, would I be allowed to do it? Well, you could say, well, it can go to the Committee of Adjustment and they may allow it. But in fact, what they would be doing is allowing fences, 6-foot fences, to go up all over the neighborhood. That would be the opening up the doors, and everybody would have 6-foot fence. It would look like Detroit or Cleveland. I'm sorry if I am offending anybody. In this neighborhood, we don't have fences in front yards. And so with respect to the building line, this is a building line for Old Abbey, and this is a building line for Rustic. In my view, when you allow a front yard fence, or if you want to call it flankage, 6 feet, to intrude out into Rustic front yard space, it seems to me there's a conflict there. That in fact what should happen is that the fence should go no further than the intersection between the respective building lines, otherwise you're invading the other space. Now I think that should be considered. The Variance Committee can do whatever they want. I can tell you what they did do, though. When my wife asked a question after I gave a presentation, the chairman of the Variance Committee said to my wife, "Speak through your husband." I don't have confidence in the Variance Committee, I'm sorry. Speak through your husband. I asked myself, is this the 18th century or maybe it's the 19th century?
Point of clarification on that.
I was appalled. Now, I want to say a few things. I heard the harangue that came from Mr. Kyle. I did not do that. I found it very offensive. Not true. It's all he said, she said stuff for convenience. And they are, in my view, quite slanderous accusations. I should tell you that when the Kyles came to the neighborhood, my wife and I said, we should go over there and bring them some greetings. We went out and got a basket of flowers, rang the doorbell, and welcomed them to the community. We tried everything we could to make them feel that they were welcome. So this harangue just doesn't fit. The interference with the pool company and the fence company, that's not the story. In fact, what happened is that because the pool company was chasing the fence company saying, get out of our way, they told me that themselves, get out of our way, we're doing work here. They tried to do all the work from our side of the property. Would you not go out and say, please, do the work from the other side? This is called interference. And so I'm very upset about all of that. I didn't engage in that, and I'm not going to engage in the he said, she said stuff. But here's a couple of examples. You can do what you want with the rest of it. With respect to this one person they brought up, Shannon Spink at 618 Rustic Drive, I showed you that property. There are no fences in the front yard. And Shannon she loves children, and she was not favorable to signing the petition, but her husband did sign it. And so, I think you need to hear the whole story. You can't just hear little bits and pieces. I think you have to look at the principles. Putting a fence out from a living room window in front of somebody's face is unheard of. It doesn't happen in our neighborhood. It hasn't happened in our neighborhood. And I'd like the decision to be based on those issues and not the he said, she said stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a question for Mr. Globus? I don't think that's yours.
No, but I think we need to clarify something that he said immediately because it's...
And I'll get to procedure pieces. I don't want to interrupt the time here and then have to go back and forth. So you'll ask it of staff. Okay, so thank you. There aren't actually any questions on your resubmission, on your redirect to Mr. Globus.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I know which item you're speaking to, Councillor Durrell. I think it would be helpful as an item of procedural clarification to identify, and this is without council themselves being present at the fence variance committee, but I am aware from legal advice as I sat down to chair this procedure that in order to speak to either that committee or this council, one registers as a delegation, and whomever is registered is the individual that is able to speak and respond to questions for that. If other people come later and try to be added, that is not procedurally sound, and however that may have been handled verbally, I think had I only had one delegate named before me, that would be the one delegate that I'd be entitled to hear from and not other parties. That's why I asked at the beginning who else would want to be party to this, and I noted the names of both individuals, Mr. Globus, you and your wife, as they were listed here on the delegation. So that because they were listed, I was happy to hear from either of you as part of your time. Maybe that was the case, maybe that wasn't the case at fence variance, but that's, as I understand, procedure. So however it may have been relayed, I think that's hopefully a helpful point of clarification on procedure, and we can get back and focus on the actual fence matter at hand. And I think, Councillor Durrell, I hope that answers the intervention you were seeking.
That wasn't the case. I want you to understand that it wasn't a case of not hearing from your wife. It was procedure, and it was your name on the list. So I just want to make sure you understand that.
So today, my wife chose to say you speak, but at the variance committee, she wanted to make one very brief.
And that's fine.
Chair, may I speak it? And got answered. My wife is a person in her own right.
Absolutely, she is, and that's not the question. And we believe in her right to speak. Her name was not on the docket, and that's why. So it was not in any way affront against your wife. This
back and forth. I appreciate the intent of it, but it's not in order, and so we'll keep moving. I understand Councillor Freeman had a question.
Yes.
Of staff.
Clerk, can I ask the clerk to just zoom this out a little bit on Rustic? I have a question for staff. So Julie, yeah, that's perfect. Just a little bit more, please. Yeah, a little bit more. I want to see the intersection up here at Whistler. So my question is to staff. Is there a fence that runs the whole length here that's also 6 feet? Maybe Mr. Keel can answer that. Is there a fence alongside here that's 6 feet that goes right past the building line? There's a wall of trees.
I think I don't want to give Mr. Keel. Mr. Keel will have an opportunity as soon as we're done these question rounds.
Is there not a fence here? 6-foot fence here? Did you see it when you were out
Yes, I did.
So how is this any different? Like, isn't this being the front yard and this being the front yard?
Yes, that would be deemed the front yard in that particular location as well, given that it is the shorter of the two lot lines.
Okay, so again, I'm going through making sure every other delegate who had spoken had an opportunity to rebut their position, having heard submissions. So, Mr. Kyle, if you would like, you do not have to, but if you would like, you can have up to 5 minutes based on other things that you've heard through these proceedings.
Again, just like to reiterate the unique shape of our lot. From the comments that were made about the 6-foot fence, we did look to the 263 Whistler Road as an example of a previously approved fence, which was just noted. At the end of this, I guess we've provided a compromise to 5 feet from the original 6 feet variance, which is just an additional 2 feet over and above that lot. The Globuses have chosen a line of trees to separate their two properties. We've chosen a fence. We're not under any understanding that if we were to fill our side lot with trees as well, that would further block the Globus' view of Old Abbey. The question on the other side of their property, the one example that was brought forward in terms of support to the other neighbor, they did want to note that their fence starts at 5.5 feet and reduces down towards to Rustic Drive. And the last thing I'd like to just make a comment on is I'd just like for people to understand that we're new to the neighborhood and just take into consideration what it feels like for us to have a neighbor petition the entire neighborhood and put a black spot in terms of our house and what that looks like in the community. It doesn't, we haven't done anything that we feel is deemed belligerous. We've gone through, again, a due process to do that. We found out about this petition on Thursday night, and went through a process where we just asked people's opinions on the fence that we erected, if they're aware of the compromise, and if they were able to provide any commentary or support. The commentary is not from us. This is commentary from all of the surrounding neighbors, a number of homes that surround our house at that particular location, and a number of homes that do agree with and support the fence that we've put up. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions for Mr. Kyle at this stage, I will ask, seeing no questions. I didn't see any. Thank you. Eleanor, you also delegated. Have you heard anything that would suggest that there was more you wanted to say? I think you were very succinct last time. Is there anything more you wanted to say to council based on what you heard after you presented? Thank you very much. So with that, we don't have any more delegations to hear. So we are now in the possession of council, sitting as an appeal committee to render a decision on this item and no doubt debate it. Mayor Jaworski?
Well, at this point, I'm prepared to move the motion as printed. I'd explain it further if we had a seconder.
Councillor Durrell seconds. And to clarify, the motion as printed is to confirm the Fence Civil Tribunal's decision as printed. Mayor Jaworski, go ahead.
So I had the opportunity to visit the site and to see what was going on. I think it really does come down to this is a very unusual situation on a corner lot that has some orientation that is apparently towards Rustic Drive, when in fact the front yard is on the on Old Abbey. The applicant was trying to make best use of the property that he has, as opposed to alienating it. The way I see it is, either way there would be you could have a fence there regardless. It would just be up to 3 feet high. So from that standpoint, it's certainly from the applicant's standpoint desirable to make great use of the new property that the family's become owners of. From whether the fence is 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, they've made a reduction themselves to 5 feet, and we've heard from staff that doesn't cause safety concerns with respect to the turning radius. So for that reason, I want to move forward with the Fence Variance Committee and their decision.
Other comments from members of council? Councillor Maven.
I like the lot that Councillor Freeman pointed out. I wonder if it went through a Fence Variance Committee as well. Reducing from something that didn't exist isn't a reduction. It's an increase. So if it's 6 feet and you say you reduced it to 5, no, you didn't. The bylaw said 3 and you increased it to 5. So it's not a reduction. I still have trouble with this, but I'm not seeing. I feel sorry for the neighbors, both sides. It's really, really tough. But I just feel that somewhere along the lines we're a little bit short here someplace in what we're doing. We're not setting rules out that are clear enough. You shouldn't have to go to Sign Variance Committee if our rules are good. Sign variance, fence variance, sorry. I keep saying that. But anyway, I'll be voting against it on the basis that the increases from 3 to 5. And maybe it was 3 to 4 would be better. I don't know. But it is from 3 feet. And the bylaw says it should be 3. I think that's what the people at the Fence Variance Committee said. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councillor Freeman.
I appreciate the comments that have been made thus far, and I guess one of my big pieces is that in everything that we do here at the city, we make a rule and then we allow ways for changes to be considered. So we do that at zoning. We do that with things like committee of adjustment. We do it with easements. So this property actually has an easement on it, so the fence is actually pulled back more away from Rustic than would have been permitted regularly. And so for me, this is about recognizing that we have rules, but that we have ways in which people can petition to make a change, and therein it's still in keeping with the rule. And this particular fence is being installed purposefully to support the opening up of the yard someday down the road and be a pool enclosure. And the only way to achieve the pool enclosure in this section is for it to be 5 feet. That's our rule. And so for me, and notwithstanding, I appreciate the evidence that's brought forth with regard to a portion of Colonial Acres. I live in an area of Colonial Acres of a similar age. My house was built in 52, and there are many homes that have fencing that extend out into what would be deemed a front yard because of the way that, especially on corner lots, the way that they're constructed. There's certainly one at the corner of Whistler and Lee. And I also know of situations where people have requested fence variances from 8 feet to 10 feet to account for various and sundry issues associated with the orientation of their property. And so I guess I don't see this as being contrary to the way that we manage a lot of different decisions. Zoning, committee of adjustment, sign variance. It's all a process that's been put in place, recognizing that we can't always come up with one rule that works for every piece of property in town.
Any other members of council wish to speak to this item before I bring the discussion to a close? I will be brief. The obligation for both Fence Variance Committee and for council sitting as an appeal body is to, in reviewing an application, consider whether the request is minor in nature, whether the proposed variance is desirable and in keeping with the fences in the area, and whether the proposed variance affects safety or sightlines. On the latter, we've heard quite clearly it does not. On the second item, there is some disagreement among the parties present today, and among those that we've heard in absentia through various other means, whether through petitions or other forms of presentation. So there is not a consistent view of the neighborhood of what is desirable and in keeping with the fences in the area. But it is useful for the submissions that we saw to recognize that in corner cases, and this lot is certainly one, where the architectural front of the house and the orientation of the house does not match the wording in the bylaw for what the front yard is. And that's what's driven the need for an interpretation and what's driven the variance request here. What is common and pervasive in the neighborhood, and we can see it from this map and from all the submissions we had, is that in general, properties are much longer than they are wide in this neighborhood and in almost every neighborhood. And so the bylaw deems in these cases the front yard correctly in most cases. In this oddly shaped parcel, in the interpretation of the owners, and it does not, and in the interpretation of Fence Variance Committee as advised by the various parties, considering it otherwise to permit what would otherwise be permitted in the flankage yard, in the front yard instead, is minor in nature. And is consistent with some of the other cases in this neighborhood. Though fences are not common, they exist in some other similar circumstances, depending on the individual cases as they may be from various configurations of lots. So in my view, it's met the test. It is a request that is minor in nature. It is generally desirable certainly for the applicant and is understood to be reasonable given the minor nature, and is in keeping with some fences in the area that have similar issues but presented differently, and it does not affect safety or sightlines. So I will be voting to confirm the decision of Fence Variance Committee, which listed their reasons similarly but more succinctly than I did. Hearing no further comments from council, I'll take the vote then. All those in favor of motion moved by Mayor Jaworski to confirm the decision? All of those opposed? Councillor Maven. Thank you very much. That concludes the appeal hearing. I think that was an experience for many parties. I know there were many items that came up before today and today that were not specifically related to the fence matter in question, but related to issues of neighborliness, conversations with others, and there is certainly a challenge to be managed. So putting our councillor hats on rather than our appeal committee hats on, I would all join Councillor Maven in feeling for all parties that this has not been an easy process, and it is not one that I think anybody is satisfied with how it has concluded. But we have all followed the steps that we're supposed to follow, and we've dealt with the result as it is, and that leaves some neighborliness challenges to manage going forward, which were ably in the hands of the individuals of the neighborhood and as supported by the city and the ward councillor as may be necessary to deal with our neighborhood strategy, which is around cohesiveness and conversation and capacity building in neighborhoods. So hopefully we can get back to a better place than we have found ourselves today. With that, I will move to staff reports. First up is the Core Consumer Price Index update. I see just recommendations and no presentations, but Kim and Brad, at least Kim here, if there are questions from council. Are there questions from council on this report? Seeing none, we are to receive it as information. Somebody should move to do so. Councillor Whaley, Councillor Veith, all those in favor? So received. The 2019 interim tax levy, prepared by Jody Vitton. There are recommendations in the report. Are there any questions from members of council for Mr. Hittinga? Mr. Maven.
And thank you, and through you, Chair Henry, to Jody. Sorry, Paul.
There's
But-
been a slight change.
Yeah. My question is, it's actually really a Steve. Steve's answered back my email this morning, but is this not really a task? I know it's routine business, but isn't really not a task for the 2019 council?
Paul?
Through you, Chair Henry, through to Councillor Maven. We did confirm with our solicitor that it is under the authority of this council to approve this bylaw. We do need this bylaw to be approved prior to the roll being returned on the second Tuesday of December, and we feel it's most appropriate to have that approved tonight, given that we traditionally don't do business on the inaugural nights, and December 10th is an extremely busy night with the budget release.
I'll look for a mover. Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Whaley. I was wondering whether to interpret Councillor Freeman's hand to the forehead as a second, but I'll take Councillor Whaley. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Maven, that's carried. We now have the surplus projection, and there is one. That's always better than if there isn't one. Are there any questions for Mr. Hidinga on the report? I observe that the department's line is under a slight deficit rather than the larger surpluses in past years, but a number of sustainable surpluses and unsustainable deficits are being referred to the 2019 budget process, perhaps and beyond, and the next council will see those in due course. I believe that also needs to be received as information. The mayor would like information. Would anyone else like information? Councillor Veith likes information. All those in favor of information? Carried. We now have from today the procurement award summary for Q3. Any questions from council on those items? Procuring some good stuff. Mayor Jaworski?
To Tracy, just on the wide variety of, great to see a wide variety of bids come in, 2, 4, 6, 8, like 9.
The mayor is on the next item.
Sorry.
But he will move this item for receiving information on the procurement award summary. Am I correct?
Oh, I'm running off the old agenda, that's why. Okay.
But you can move it, and somebody else can second it. Councillor Veith also likes information. All those in favor? Carried. And now, Mayor, questions on Maple Hill Creek?
I do.
Please go ahead.
On the to Tracy on the wide variety of bids that we received, certainly having a lot is good. Very much big difference in the, or to Jessica, hello, to big difference in the value of the bids, ranging from 1.2 million to 2.6 million, which all are sort of seem to all be within our budget. Do you have any thoughts on the wide variety of bids or any commentary on that?
Sure, through you, Chair Henry. So we did a review of all of the bids that came in, and it seemed to be the discrepancy was mainly in the MOB and DMOB. So it's generally where our contractors will bury some of the additional costs that they have. And so the lower tender numbers you're seeing are companies that are just coming in with their base MOB and DMOB for their equipment. When we looked at some of the,
Might need more information on what that means.
Like mobilization of equipment onto and from each site. So we have a line item for those for each site. And in this case, we have 7 different locations that the contractor will be moving to as they go along the project. So under each one of those locations, we had a mobilization and demobilization cost. So that's sort of where most of the discrepancy came from when we looked at the numbers. But generally, all of the big ticket items in each reach and for each stormwater pond were fairly similar across the board for all contractors.
So it's like the kids in the Service Center open house, they get to move the big diggers. Apparently it's harder for some than for others. would be what I'd take from that. Any other questions on this? I observe with the mayor that I do appreciate where the number falls relative to the budget. Hopefully that continues through the project. So we do need an approval of the RFT. Would the mayor wish to move it? Would anybody like to second it? Councillor Veith, any further commentary? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. Consideration, notice, communications, regional information, unfinished business. We have none. Is there any new business, Council? Are there any questions, Council? Is there a motion to adjourn, Council? Councillor Durrell, Councillor Veith, all those in favor? And that concludes the final FSP meeting of this council term.
Yeah.